Hey, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Get Well Institute podcast. So, today's episode is all about lab testing to have a better understanding of weight gain and maybe why you put it on in the first place, but having a long term game plan to not only be efficient with weight loss, but to keep it off once you've lost it. So, I know a lot of companies, a lot of places will help you lose weight. But again, they don't care once you lose it, you're out their door. They have no game plan for you to implement once you've lost that weight on how to keep it off. And again, 80% of people 5 years down the road will gain the weight back. And at the Get Well Institute, this is a big part of what we're trying to solve and support is how do we empower our community and our patient base to not only lose the weight that they want to lose so they can be confident, healthy, move like they want to move again, but how do we also help them understand why it got on there so they have a better plan to keep it off? So today's episode is really into are you really getting all the lab tests that you can? Because again, if you're getting your routine labs, I can almost assure you, I'll go to Vegas and make a sizable bet that you're not getting very comprehensive labs. So a lot of times we'll have patients come in doing this 10, 12 years. We'll have patients like, doc, I got really good labs. My doctor ran them. They're full panel. And I'm like, okay. And again, you just kind of learn to shake your head and be like, okay, well, just send them over and let's see what's on there. Often what you see on the screen here, but for those listening, you'll see a CBC, which is really your white and your red blood cells, and kind of some qualities about them. You'll see a CMP, which is really just looking at your kidney, liver function, electrolytes, a fasting glucose. And then you'll see a lipid panel, which is your cholesterol and triglycerides. And you'll see probably a thyroid panel, which really usually most of the time just includes TSH. You might see one additional thyroid marker like T4, but I'm telling you, it should be much more comprehensive. So this usually works out to about a 2.5 page panel. And again, when you're starting to look down the barrel of stubborn weight gain and you're like, hey, look, this is not coming off. I'm telling you, these labs are no longer enough, and we need to start looking at much more comprehensive labs. So, what labs are missing? So, a full thyroid panel to begin with is probably the most missed thing here. And a full thyroid panel is not only that TSH, your T4, but your T3 and your free T3, as well as reverse T3. Now, if those markers come back off or wonky, then again, I would recommend running thyroid antibodies because, especially in women, if you are hypothyroid, more than the majority of you have an autoimmune mechanism called Hashimoto's that's causing it. So it's really an immune issue causing a secondary thyroid problem. That's important to know. But again, that's the basis and kind of the starting point. You need to run a fasting insulin. You need to run a fasting cortisol. You need to run a hemoglobin A1C. This is kind of better average glucose marker. Your red blood cells live 90 to 120 days. So this is looking at how kind of glycosylated or sugar coated that red blood cell is in its lifespan. So this is more of your 3 to 4 month average of glucose. And then you need to run some inflammatory markers. And again, a good start would be C-reactive protein, ferritin, homocysteine. You could always throw in an omega-3 ratio profile to get an idea of how good you are at kind of modulating inflammation if it happens. And then a marker called adiponectin, another set of hormones called leptin and ghrelin, red blood cell magnesium, vitamin D, zinc. And again, if you want to go and be very thorough, look at a testosterone, but also a free and total. So that's we're just going to throw that out there. That's a lot to chew on, but we're going to kind of break down why some are really important and some of the mechanisms. So kind of going back, if you listen to our sleep and its role in weight regulation, then you'll be familiar with the ones called leptin and ghrelin. So leptin is this hormone that signals fullness. Ghrelin signals hunger and appetite. So we know when you get a good night's sleep, you're better at regulating both of these hormones. The interesting thing is a lot of these other additional lab markers impact your leptin and ghrelin sensitivity and how efficient you are. So I don't really talk about it later on, but just so you have a little primer and reminder about what leptin is as a hormone, because it's going to come up here down in a few minutes. So let's look at thyroid hormone and weight gain. So we can make it incredibly deep and thorough, but this is often very, very much missed. And we need to figure out where the problem lies, because it's not just you can have a thyroid issue from just the gland is not producing enough. You can have a primary, like a pituitary issue where it's a brain based mechanism. Let's say somebody has repetitive head trauma, they served in the military, they had a lot of percussive blast exposure, or they are a pro athlete, or just a regular athlete that played contact sports. You can see issues with the pituitary starting the whole cascade of a lot of hormones. So if you came in with a low TSH, but you didn't look at other markers, your doctor might be like, "Hey, this is really good. Your TSH is really, really low. That tells us you're not hypothyroid. Uh, Thumbs up." Yet we don't know why you're gaining weight. So I'll tell you though, if you come in and you have a low TSH and you have low T4 and T3, your actual hormone output, then we know like the problem is with the pituitary orchestrating everything all together. There are also some medications that can suppress it as well. So it just tells us why it's really, really important to look at the full story. Beyond that, okay. So when we look at this piece, we want to make sure that we're doing everything right by you. And so when we do that and we want to look at a full thyroid panel, we want to see how hard is the brain working to orchestrate this. That's your TSH, your thyroid stimulating hormone. And then we want to look at the hormones produced from that effort. And that's going to be your T3 and T4. Now, most of what you're going to make is going to exist in T4. 7 to 10% is going to be in the form of T3. T3, though, is your active hormone. It's going to be the one that wants to land, bind on the cell to tell your cells how fast that metabolism needs to go. And so your metabolism is really your rate limiting step, or how well you're going to be at burning the calories that you're consuming. So obviously, if it's low and you feel like your metabolism is slowing down, then we want not only just to look at thyroid, but we want to be very specific in and look at T3, because this is your active hormone. You make a lot of it, you convert a lot of that active hormone in the liver and the GI tract. So a lot of times too, we need to look at liver and gut markers kind of with it as well. But again, that's for another day. When we look at free T3, so again, it's another form of active thyroid hormone, but free hormone is what's available, right? If it's all protein bound, which means it's being transported, it's on a truck getting carried. So I always explain this to patients. If you have all this hormone, but it's packed onto that Target truck going out to the store, and it's never on the shelf for you to get, then you're still kind of deprived of that hormone, right? Or that item you're wanting. So you need it to be transported, but once it's been transported, you need to let it go, and you need to have some available and free to you. And so that's why free T3 is really critical, because again, if you have even normal T3, but a robustly low free T3, you can still have issues with metabolism. Another marker that's really a good insight on the thyroid front is reverse T3. Reverse T3, ideally, you want it in this mid range. When it's really, really high, it can tell us that, hey, high stress for prolonged periods of time are going on, acute trauma, acute inflammatory issues. But again, it's a way that your liver tries to slow down your metabolism in moments of acute stress. So again, in short periods, it's a smart response, but in long-term elevations, it's actually blunting your metabolism, because reverse T3 is going to compete against your T3 hormone. So reverse T3 is a kind of funny form. It's a metabolically inactive version of your thyroid hormone that is meant to not drive metabolism, but to compete for the same landing site that your active hormone wants to find. And so this is a good time to talk about intermittent fasting. Again, I like it. There's some good benefits from it, but if you're doing it and you want to know, like, are you towing the line efficiently, or are you overdoing it? Reverse T3 is that one marker I encourage everybody to get, because if you're constantly putting your body into a calorie deficit that's too much, you're going to usually see reverse T3 start to climb up above you, and it's going to go north of 18 into the 20s. And we know you're actually starting to lose the benefits of it from a metabolism or a weight loss standpoint. Yeah. And you might start to notice, like, man, I'm not losing weight anymore doing this intermittent fasting. In fact, the moment I slip up and kind of eat and have a date night and eat a little bit extra, I pack on 5 pounds real quick. That's reverse T3 potentially on those instances. So again, There's a time and a place for intermittent fasting, but I always encourage, if you're going to do it, have your eyes on metrics or markers that tell us, are you doing it properly? Are you maybe doing a little too much and need to tone it down? This is one of those markers, and that's reverse T3. All right. So next, vitamin D. I mean, I'm trying to remember the last time I saw the stat on it, but I think it's like 1 billion people worldwide are deficient in vitamin D. Vitamin D is essentially a hormone. It regulates over 1,200 genes in the human body. Um, but let's kind of tie it into weight and metabolism. So we know vitamin D has a direct influence on kind of how our fat cells store and use fat. So we know that if we're deficient in vitamin D, it may allow our fat cells to overstore fatty acids and accumulate calories in the fat cell, right? Causing weight gain. We know adequate levels of vitamin D prevent that accumulation or that excessive accumulation. So that's one mechanism. So the role of vitamin D in appetite ties back into that hormone called leptin. We know vitamin D levels help us promote leptin sensitivity. And when you hear sensitivity, it just means efficient use of the hormone. So we know if you have good vitamin D levels, it promotes good leptin sensitivity. And leptin tells us when you should be full, aka it prevents you from overeating, overindulging. Biggest one here, I would say, is it promotes insulin sensitivity. Insulin sensitivity is probably the biggest driver of stubborn weight gain, because you're losing the hormone regulation of how you bring in calories, burn them, store them, and that's a huge issue. So we know vitamin D is a very good supporter of insulin sensitivity. We know vitamin D, some of my favorite benefits of vitamin D are the inflammatory, huge inflammatory regulation. So it's not abnormal to have inflammation. Like if somebody comes up and punches you on the shoulder and you have a bruise from that kind of compact, that punch, you want your immune response to go and say, hey, look, you're injured. Let's bring my immune system there to try to repair it. But when it lingers, that's a problem. So we know vitamin D helps increase your regulatory T cells that help us give really good immune regulation. So again, vitamin D is critical from an anti-inflammatory standpoint. And I'll get into even the inflammatory and inflammation and its role in weight gain on a couple other slides. Vitamin D is critical for having proper muscle function. Again, muscle is probably one of our best tools to burn calories, especially like, again, what's the point of exercise? But we know vitamin D can give you better strength, energy, recovery from a muscle standpoint. And again, we know the better your lean body mass, the better your insulin sensitivity. So it hits that point number 3. It's just cascading benefits. So again, and then last but not least, vitamin D has a huge proponent in terms of supporting healthy mood and motivation and regulation. You've heard of the winter blues. Again, we know vitamin D levels can dip in winter months, but again, vitamin D has a huge aspect in terms of our frontal lobe health. We have a lot of receptors or landing sites for vitamin D in the frontal lobe. And so if we get deficient, our frontal lobes will really give us like our motivation, kind of our perception of the world around us. So again, vitamin D is critical for mood and motivation in that sense, which again, if it's about you eating, making the right choices, getting to the gym, cooking a healthy meal versus stopping at the fast food restaurant, this is kind of where that one comes into play. All right. So probably one of the most important is your fasting insulin, right? So in the morning, in a normal scenario, we want a nice fasting insulin between 5 and 7. And your fasting cortisol should be higher than your fasting insulin for sure. Cortisol is your fasting hormone. It's a stress hormone. It's also it modulates inflammation, but they're kind of like opposite. They're like yin and yang. So if insulin is low and cortisol is nice and high, cortisol is going after stored calories to keep your glucose maintained throughout the night. Whereas fasting, you don't need insulin. You're not eating anything. So there's nothing to promote energy storage. But what you see when people start to get, gaining weight, especially when it starts to become stubborn, these hormones become closer and closer together in the fasting state in most people in this scenario. And then they can actually reverse where you're fasting at night and you see a insulin level first thing in the morning that is 18, and you see a fasting cortisol is 9, and you're like, again, hormonally, you're like, man, weight is going to be likely to be trapped in this scenario. Because again, when insulin is around, it also inhibits fat retrieval for you to continue to burn. So if you think about that, if you're fasting insulin, when you're sleeping during the night, when you're not eating, you're in this fasting state where you should be promoting this, basically going after those stored calories. Insulin, if it's high, it's suppressing that. It's blocking your retrieval of stored calories. AKA, it's promoting this very, very, very stubborn weight gain. And it's really kind of like really frustrating, like, because you're doing everything usually a lot of times, these people where they're working out, they're in a calorie deficit, but their fasting insulin is still elevated, then you're really, really frustrated because, again, if insulin is high, it is trapping that on. And again, it increases fat storage, it slows down fat retrieval to burn it, and it promotes you storing more glucose as glycogen or fat as fatty acids and fat cells. Insulin, too, when it's high, it's going to make you have pretty ridiculous sweet tooth cravings because, again, your blood sugar is going up and down, and it's wanting things to kind of come behind it. When you crash is usually when you crave the calorie burst. So you're going to see food cravings. And again, if it's messing with food cravings, it again is going to have an impact on that hormone called leptin, which tells you you're full. So if you had to pick one, let's say if you had to pick two, that full thyroid panel and that fasting insulin would be like at least the starting point if you had to have a compromise. But again, they're all incredibly essential. Cortisol is that next one. We already touched on it with your fasting insulin. So again, this should be definitely higher than your fasting cortisol. But again, too much cortisol is going to increase fat around the abdomen or central obesity. So it's going to pack weight on in the midsection. So if you picture there's a guy, his arms are pretty ripped, but then you look at the midsection, it's just puffy. You're like, that's like stress weight. That's cortisol weight. Again, and it can go hand in hand with cortisol because they chase each other. But again, it's not abnormal to have little spurts of cortisol, but again, it is, makes you more alert in times of stress. But again, the frog is not always meant to be in the boiling pot of water, right? So if we're always in that stress state, you start to have these prolonged effects. So you're freeing up calories, but if you're just sitting there stressed out at your desk and you're not actually running and burning them, then you have these spurts of high glucose. You have high insulin that's that, oh, we can take that and make it a fatty acid and shunt it into a fat cell. So you kind of create this biochemistry that's very conducive for weight gain when you have high cortisol and you're losing insulin sensitivity. Again, promotes visceral fat around the midsection. Visceral fat is that bad fat we don't want around our organs. Also, kind of comes with some collateral inflammatory issues. And again, inflammation is going to have a role in terms of kind of messing with all of our hormones and how efficiently they run our cells. All right, red blood cell magnesium. I rarely see anybody run this one, but magnesium is critical. It runs 300 kind of biochemical pathways in the body that we know of, and we'll probably learn more. But again, we know some of those are pathways that help with how well you are controlling your glucose and insulin sensitivity. There's that fun word again, insulin sensitivity. So again, we know adequate magnesium levels help. Ideally, again, when you're looking at a red blood cell magnesium, you want that level north of 6. So that's your kind of baseline and goal. So if you see it at 4.7, we got some work to do. And this might be one of these mechanisms that kind of cause some issues in terms of weight. It helps with energy production. And again, when you think of energy production, it's that ability to take the calories you eat, whether it's fat, protein, or glucose, sugar, carbohydrates, and pull it into our body, our cells, and make something called ATP or adenosine triphosphate. That is really our metabolism. How fast that happens is our metabolism. And so we know that magnesium is critical for your body to be able to take fat and bring it in and make that last step of energy, carbs, and protein. It is huge. So it is this massive regulator as we start to process and break our calories down. If oxygen is present, it can force it into this final kind of big cascade where we get the best energy yield. So really, really important for that. Again, when you have a good metabolic rate, magnesium helps maintain it. So, again, a lot of times when people come in with high reverse T3s, and we know that's slowing down their metabolic rate, telling the body, like, slow things down, conserve energy, there's a crisis going on. I often will recommend people up their magnesium, especially if it was low, to try to, as we get magnesium increasing with exercise and fixing some of these other issues, then we want to make sure magnesium maintains it. Magnesium is essential for proper muscle function. And again, we know muscle burns calories. So, again, a lot of times if you're having muscle cramps, magnesium is probably the first thing I look for, not necessarily electrolytes, but magnesium. Magnesium is critical for cortisol and stress regulation. It's a very calming impact to the central nervous system, to our brain, calms down a lot of our excitatory pathways, gives us better regulation of them. And in doing so, you see better sleep. Even your ability to make serotonin to feel happy, but then you convert serotonin to melatonin to have sleep initiation. That production of serotonin needs magnesium to happen. So, again, even mood, we can put mood down there as well for motivation and dopamine. Same thing, to go from L-DOPA to dopamine, you need magnesium as one of the ingredients to help make that step happen. Same with 5-HTP to serotonin, you need magnesium. So magnesium is one that has a lot of different avenues it can help with healthy weight and metabolism. Zinc is another interesting one. Zinc supports the proper breakdown to allow fats to be broken down, to be used as fuel, protein to be used as fuel, and carbs and glucose to be used as fuel. So if somebody's zinc deficient, again, it makes it harder for you to tap into the storage form of those and use them as a fuel source. So again, if you're like, man, I'm eating 1,000 calories a day, but I'm burning 2,000, and you're not losing weight, you're just kind of feeling inflamed, then again, these are things that I want you to start thinking about, because again, zinc can be one of them that messes with how you retrieve that stored energy, especially if you fast. If you don't eat for 4 hours and you get like hangry and jittery, that tells us there's a potential retrieval issue. Like, you're not very good at tapping into that stored energy. Now, if you're skin and bones and you don't have a lot of excess fat, you're 2% body fat, then again, you might hit that sooner. But again, we're talking about people that want to lose weight and stay and keep it off, then we're thinking that they have stored calories to tap into. So if you're getting hypoglycemic like responses, where you're jittery or hangry when you don't eat for a few hours, then we think, okay, is this really a reflection of how good I am at getting stored calories? Because again, if it is, then it's like, would you be surprised to see that weight is stubborn and sticking on the body? No, to me, it makes sense, right? So these are things that we want to consider. Okay, zinc is a critical mineral for thyroid hormone function. Again, we know thyroid is what kind of tells every single cell in our body what the rate of burn is available, like how well our metabolism can work. So we need that. We know zinc as well also has a role in promoting optimal leptin hormone function, aka telling you you're full when you should be full. Zinc helps with that hormone, helps with insulin support, helps make your beta cells of your pancreas have proper signaling and storage of insulin. So again, has a role in improved insulin signaling, aka insulin sensitivity, which is critical for healthy weight and metabolism. And lastly, zinc helps with promoting lean body mass by supporting adequate growth hormone and testosterone levels. Huge, right? So if you're like, wow, my doctor won't run this test on me, looked at me funny and cross-eyed when I asked for these. One way you can do it's called a zinc tally test, TALLY. Again, if you put zinc in your mouth, you should taste it instantaneously, is the theory behind this test. If you're deficient in zinc, what happens is you put it in and you're like, it's on your tongue and it's like, might be 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds. You're like, oh, I'm starting to get this metallic taste in my mouth now. Again, if you have a prolonged response to have that a taste of zinc, that's a good indicator that you're probably deficient. So you can get Metagenics is a company we use. They have a liquid zinc. We'll run that. on people sometimes just to see while we're waiting for labs to come back, like, hey, is this something we should need to add in? Zinc copper ratios. You can see I had a really good psychiatrist walk through zinc copper studies. People with like who are amped up, anxious, if you have really robust copper levels and lower zinc, that can also promote some psychiatric issues, anxiety, and stuff like that, insomnia. So, getting your zinc ratio to copper from zero point 0.7 to 1 can be very beneficial in those cases as well. All right, let's go into this other hormone. Again, we talked about this in our sleep podcast because we know proper sleep gives us better signaling of this hormone called adiponectin. Adiponectin, ideally, when you fast, you want to see it above 10. Okay, let's say it again. You want to see a fasting adiponectin above 10. It promotes insulin sensitivity and it promotes fat breakdown. So, as you're fasting and the longer you fast, this hormone should be secreted more and more. Again, your fat cells should secrete it, saying to the body, hey, look, you can use me as a fuel while you're fasting. So, if it's not high, let's say it's around 4 in a fasted state or first thing in the morning, again, would it make sense that, yeah, it's probably going to be hard to tap into fat cells as a fuel and break it down, even though you might be in a calorie deficit, you're not eating, right? So, again, adiponectin is a very good marker to see, one, how good you are if you get into a calorie deficit of tapping into stored fat. Two, how well your body is responding to the overall weight loss journey, right? So we track this number because a lot of times when we start with people, this value is not 10, it is 3, it is 4. But as we work them through and they start cleaning up their biochemistry, they start losing weight, you'll start to see adiponectin go back up. Again, we want to see it back up before we release them back into the wild per se, right? Before we kind of finish up, we want to know that you have tools and resources that we know that when you're done your weight loss journey with our team, that you're not going to quickly gain that weight back. Your biochemistry is kind of shifted back into favor to kind of being this robust metabolic beast where it's good at burning calories. It can get after them when you're in this calorie deficit and it knows how to retrieve them from storage sites, right? And so this is that one marker as well as a few others that we want to keep an eye on. So it breaks fat, it promotes fat breakdown. It is also cardiovascular protective. So there is a heart protective aspect to it and an anti-inflammatory aspect. From a research standpoint, it has an inverse relationship with obesity. So as adiponectin goes up, the obesity chances go down, or vice versa. As obesity goes up, adiponectin goes down, right? So that's kind of the relationship between the two. So we want to see as you lose weight, you become more ideal body weight, your adiponectin level should actually go up. Again, that tells us you're going to be better equipped to go after stored fat as a fuel. All right, so inflammatory markers. So C-reactive protein is a very good one to run. Primarily, it's released by the liver when it senses inflammatory issues. But we know you can have like people like, oh, you have to eat your way to type 2 diabetes. You can inflame your way there. So we know persistent chronic inflammation will damage glucose receptors, promoting insulin sensitivity as well. Again, so we know prolonged CRP levels for long periods of time can start to cause basically insulin resistant like mechanisms. So the inflammation is there first, then you start to see the insulin resistance show up, causing blood sugar issues kind of to show up down the road. So again, we run this on absolutely everybody. So we use CRP. We want it into this 1 to 3 range, and ideally less than 1 is what we're striving for everybody. And again, super easy to get an idea where it's at. And we just know, is this inflammatory loop on the radar and something that needs to be mitigated? Or do we need to find the source of inflammation and solve for it? So that way, when you're done losing weight, you keep the weight off. We know CRP, as it's elevated, it's going to dampen hormone signaling, whether it's testosterone, thyroid. It's going to make hormone use not as efficient because CRP will block kind of where you need to bind hormone. It's a competitor, it's kind of an antagonist for those binding sites. So if you're not making more hormone to offset that kind of competition, then you're going to usually start to get kind of symptomatic of whatever that hormone is. So if it's testosterone, you're like, I don't feel like I have as much muscle mass, or I'm not as efficient at putting lean muscle mass on. Yet my testosterone levels are the same, right? So those are things to consider. It's also something to consider when people go on HRT or hormone replacement therapy is if you're not solving for this aspect as well, you might be thinking, we always describe it as the honeymoon phase of HRT. You might be like, oh man, I feel great for 2 or 3 weeks. But the same old biochemistry causing kind of this low grade fire everywhere starts to kind of show its head again. And what commonly happens, uh, unfortunately, is we'll just up your dose of testosterone. We won't, but a lot of times you see providers like, oh, well, you just need another, maybe it's 700 isn't high enough for you. Let's go to 9. Let's go to 11. Let's go to 12. And again, it's just there's so many other aspects that can interfere with how you use hormones properly. So again, always a good marker to check whether it's for weight, whether it's HRT, just to make sure this is in that optimal range because we want to see you have the peak benefit from anything that you're implementing, right? Nothing drives us more nuts than seeing people work and try to do things and put the effort in, implement things and not really get the outcome because there's some sloppiness around kind of the application of it. So again, we're trying to give you those tools so you can be the best advocates for this. And again, I hope this is going to be helpful, not super overwhelming. Again, the goal is just if you start looking at 2 or 3 of these and start kind of adding them, again, it's going to lead to gradual progress. CRP is also going to reduce metabolic rate. Same mechanism. It's going to make it harder for thyroid hormone and insulin to do its job. So what are you going to have to do? You're going to potentially up your insulin. So now you're going to have a gradual increase in fasting insulin levels can increase. It's just, you see that. I mean, we see this all the time. Again, it's, and the patient's like, but my thyroid is normal. Like, yeah, but you have this inflammatory kind of cloud just blunting every good hormone from doing its job. And also when CRP levels are high for prolonged periods of time, you're also going to see this increased preference for that visceral fat, that more inflammatory, stubborn fat. Another inflammatory marker, it's not always inflammatory. It's a storage form of iron, but it's ferritin. But if it's high and outside of range, it can start to have these inflammatory effects. If it's really, really low, it can tell us that you're anemic. And again, if you think of like, hey, if I'm anemic, it's really an oxygen issue getting to the cell. So you're not going to be super efficient at getting oxygen to the cell, and you're not going to be super efficient at making energy efficiently. You're going to feel fatigued. You might be more sore after workouts. That might make you less motivated to continue your workouts. So again, it's a really easy marker to capture. It's one of the first things the liver will start to dump when the liver is upset and angry. You'll start seeing an acute phase reaction or ferritin dumping. So you'll see ferritin start to creep on the high side. And again, all this is important because again, if it's inflammatory, it competes for hormones and binding sites. So it kind of can blunt a lot of different hormones from doing their job, halting metabolism, driving issues with insulin sensitivity. And then even more importantly, iron is a critical cofactor ingredient in thyroid hormone loops. So you need thyroid hormone to have iron in place. So if it's on the low side, then we better be looking at iron, ferritin, and kind of the whole picture. But again, that's one of those things where high or low can have impacts on the metabolic front. So I hope this was very helpful. I hope it wasn't super overwhelming. I included just a punch list of kind of these labs. Again, I put down testosterone as well. Again, I think testosterone as we age can have a protective effect cardiovascularly as well as lean body mass as well. But I don't always want to jump out of the gate because there'll be a lot of people that will give that to you before you fix these other markers. And we know like if somebody has high insulin levels, you're going to increase what's called aromatization, which is you taking testosterone and aromatizing it into estrogen. And high estrogen can lead to, especially in males, that stubborn midsection belly fat. So again, to me, it's there, but I really think if we have this game plan to make sure we focus on these other hormones, we have this kind of bigger picture. Women, again, testosterone is important for you as well. Again, it promotes lean body mass, good for libido, good for focus, cognition, and mental energy. It's protective to the brain. And again, we've seen all. Like, I had a female patient come in. Like they were hitting her up with testosterone because she had chronic infections, but they just kept hitting her up with more and more testosterone. She came in with testosterone of like 260. That would make some men jealous. We usually like see a range of 20 to 40. It depends, but usually that's like a mid-range, like a okay spot for female to be. And obviously it's again back into free versus total. We also want to see a very good free hormone level with your testosterone. Because again, if you got a high normal testosterone, but you have little free hormone, then there's something going on where you're holding on to that free hormone and it's not able to do its job. So lots to consider. So again, run these labs if you need help with them, whether you have insurance or you don't. Again, they're not crazy expensive to run this full panel. Whether insurance will cover it, if not, even cash prices to do it once a year to get a good baseline, it's not a bad idea because it can save you tons of money doing other things that don't really yield you the results you want. And having a grip on these can also be as the most efficient kind of piece to helping you not only lose the weight we're helping you lose efficiently and more efficiently, but also to keep it off. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this was very informative. Again, this is not medical advice. That's for you and our medical team to have the interaction, or you and your provider. But again, this is really just a resource to give you good information to make you a better advocate, ask better questions. Okay. Be sure, if you haven't yet, follow us at Get Well Institute on Instagram. You can direct message, you can comment any topics you might want covered. I'm happy to put those together so you get more information where you're interested in. So until next time, we'll talk to you soon.